Well, hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in to How I Record Bass Covers, part number three. Before we move on, if you have not already watched parts 1 and parts 2, parts 1 and 2, head to the description below to get those links. Should only take you about 25 minutes total to watch, so if you're just hanging out, doing nothing, that's the perfect thing for you to do. Otherwise, the information that we're going to be talking about moving forward is it's pretty predicated on those first two videos, but we are going to be touching on a pretty cool concept called reamping that I really enjoy and really love to use in my recording. So, like I said, if you haven't watched those parts and can, head to the description. Next few things, if you make sure you subscribe to this channel. Doesn't cost you a thing, doesn't hurt you anything. Just click subscribe if you have a YouTube account. If you have a Google account, that means you have a YouTube account. So subscribe to that, like these videos, comment on them, turn on notifications to get these videos first and foremost in your inbox. And almost as important as sharing or as subscribing, share these videos. So we're going to turn our attention from looking directly at me in the full frame to our screen sharing. We're down in the bottom right-hand corner of the video. We're back working in the new light project that I have. We're working on John Mayer's new light as a cover. What we talked about last video is editing the dry track that we send in. So I've time aligned everything. We are ready to reamp. And what we're going to be doing, the back end side of this looks like, all right, cool. I've got my dry track through some processing used with the PodGo. I'm going to send this information with special sends and outputs to a separate track that has all of the effects and the channel send from the PodGo already enabled, lined up, ready to go, so that when I press record, which I did, as you can see, when I was recording this before we got started on part 3, when I press record, what is going to be sent to this channel, channel number 3, is the processed, affected with an E, track. And what I did when I recorded this, I turned the tube EQ and compressor off so that it had a completely dry, bland, if you will, signal going in, so that there was it was the, if you will, the purest signal that I could send. So in between all of that, I want to show you guys really quick what the bass recording patch that I use looks like. Now, the reason why I'm not showing you the hardware interface, the actual physical PodGo unit, when I was running through this, practicing it, and instead of just hitting record and trying to press buttons here and there to make it turn on and off and try to get the right sound, what I do is I'll do a couple practice runs of just playing through, playing the dry track through the PodGo and just making sure it sounds right. But when I was doing those practice runs, I didn't engage any effects. All I did was tweak a few parameters here and there. What Pino Palladino does when it comes to his bass dynamics, he's very clean and very simple on this track especially, and he doesn't really have many up and down dynamic changes. So I wanted to keep true to that spirit. I did try a version where I recorded with some bumps here and there, but it just didn't sound right. So we kept it, I kept it pretty straightforward all the way across. So the way that I have this patch set up is for the input, I do have my USB 3.4 selected. Now, the reason why the USB 3.4 selection is on instead of the guitar is the way that reamping goes on the PodGo and most Line 6 effects, especially of the Helix line. What the manual tells you to do and what ends up happening on the back side of the software. For instance, if you were to go to, it's very similar if you were to go to a recording studio and you saw the patch bays for all of the plugins, or not really plugins, but all of the the console compressor, EQ, all of those inserts that professional recording studios have that are analog components instead of digital. What's going on here is we're controlling what's going in and what's going out in different send capacities. So when I record, I have input 1 or input 2, depending on where on my Scarlet 2i2 by Focusrite, where I have that 1/4 inch plugged in. Then once I'm ready to reamp, I'll turn my input to 3/4 and my output to 3/4. The reason why I have 3/4 turned on as my input and my output for the dry track is now with input 3/4, what's coming into the track instead of a dry signal is the processed signal so that I can have a reference point. Let's go back. Output 3/4 then goes into USB input 3/4, processes through all the effects, sends it out. Oh, wrong button. Sends it out to the reamp channel, which is input 1, 2, because that is stereo input or stereo output 1 and 2. So that's, and then you have this standard stereo out for listening back to it. It's a long process that you can totally read about if you're more interested in this process using the Podgo Edit manual or looking up the Line 6 philosophies on all of this so that you can keep it pretty consistent in-house. But that's how I have everything set up. So when I recorded this, I went ahead and had everything lined up. The only effects I'm using as we walk through, I'm not even using my volume pedal. I don't need any swells. I don't need to cut at any point. I'm actually not even using any EQ settings, mainly just whatever it's giving as just a coloration unit. 600 hertz kind of gives a little bit more of a warmth, but I don't even have that really boosted. On my trusty rusty Sans amp model, I did drop my drive a little bit so that it wasn't breaking up as heavily and getting a little bit muddier. I have my bass and my treble slightly below half just to kind of work with the less is more concept. My presence is a little bit higher. That way it can compensate for the lower treble. My blend between dry and wet mix, pretty high on the wet side, and then level. It's not boosted all the way. Could be higher, but I wanted to keep that pretty clean. Not using my next stage drive or my modulation or even another effect block that I could, or definitely not the send return loop. When I head to the Ampeg channel, pretty standard Ampeg SVT, kept it pretty, honestly, really simple. I dropped the drive pretty low because I wanted to hear more of the bass tone, keeping my bass, my low end frequency right in the middle, dropping my mid a little bit to kind of compensate for any square wave sounds that will come out, and then boosting my treble so that gets some nice high end clarity going there. Everything else is pretty set standard on this, but this is where we get a little bit more stylized, if you will. I moved my distance on the mic out from standard 1 inch to 2.5 so that it got a little bit more range and dynamic frequency. I also adjusted my low and my high cut to include and also cut out a little bit more. High cut, cutting out slight high tones, and then bringing up the low cut to find a good sweet spot in rhythm for that. While you don't really hear it as much in the track itself, I did increase my early reflections. That's just some room depth. If I were to bump it up to say like 45 or 50%, you definitely hear some slap back going on, but just kind of give it there for depth. This is where we move on into what we did for the reamp channel. Let me zoom in. Let me cut that out. As you can see, when we get to the specific frequencies and the waveforms, what the reamp ended up doing was it kind of smoothed things and compressed it nicely so that it wasn't having a wild dynamic interaction. I like that because now I can go ahead and, as you can see, I do keep some of the dry track in while boosting the reamp. It gives it some nice little character notes to it. But either way, using the reamp is a great way for me to be able to process my bass effects without having to play the tap dancing game that most pedal board users have to play. And I can also dial in the exact timings of the dry track so that at the end of the day, reamping brings it out nice and clean. Another example of how you can use reamping to your advantage, if you wanted to record this dry track and add, say, let's go here and add a delay. If you're using delay on bass, then, good for you. I don't really know how to apply it properly, so I just leave it. But this is the time where you can use time-based effects to your advantage. And when you dial in the exact, when you're hitting the note, reamping and processing through either note sync or just like that time. Processing through that will allow you to get the cleanest, most synchronized time effect possible. I'm going to go ahead and clear that out. But that's really all we got. That's all I have for you for when it comes to reamping. Stay tuned for the next video, which will be the final walkthrough video as we talk about how I set up Final Cut Pro, moving from all the recording side of things into the final stage that we take before we hit post to YouTube. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time in the next video in just a few days.